Welcome to Democracy Roundtable. I'm Nadia, and joining me today is Jordan, our co-host. We have a packed show, dissecting the latest developments impacting U.S. politics, civil rights, and global stability. From escalating tensions in the Middle East to significant domestic policy shifts and challenges to democratic institutions, it's a critical time to understand the forces at play.
Thanks, Nadia. It certainly feels like we're navigating a particularly complex landscape this March. The headlines are coming in fast, and the implications of many of these stories are profound, not just for the U.S., but globally. I'm eager to dive into some of the most pressing issues with you and our correspondents today.
Absolutely, Jordan. And speaking of global stability, we have to start with the rapidly deteriorating situation in the Middle East. It's been a month since the U.S. Israeli military operation in Iran began, and the pressure on the Trump administration to conclude this conflict is palpable. We've seen conflicting reports about negotiations, with President Trump claiming serious talks are underway while Iranian officials deny it. But what's undeniable is the increasing escalation. An Iranian attack on an Israeli oil refinery, coupled with the president's threat to obliterate Iran's energy grid, and, even more concerning, to destroy Iran's desalination plants. Let's bring in Maya, who covers international affairs, to help us unpack this. Maya, these threats against essential infrastructure like desalination plants are alarming. What's your read on the situation?
Thank you, Nadia. It's truly a perilous moment. The threat to Iran's desalination plants isn't just a military escalation, it's a potential humanitarian catastrophe. Targeting water infrastructure, especially in an arid region, could lead to widespread water shortages and a public health crisis, violating international humanitarian law. This isn't just about energy or military targets, it's about the very survival of a population. And this comes after a Kuwaiti oil tanker was attacked in Dubai port, raising fears of an oil spill and further fueling regional tensions. The U.S. military is increasing its presence, and frankly, the rhetoric from Washington is only making things more volatile. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's directive for embassies to promote X for counter-propaganda efforts also seems like a rather unconventional approach in the face of such profound military and diplomatic challenges.
That's a really critical point about the humanitarian impact, Maya. It's easy to get lost in the geopolitical chess moves, but the human cost of these threats is immense. And the conflicting messages about negotiations don't instill much confidence either. It feels like we're constantly on the brink. How do these actions square with any diplomatic off-ramps?
They don't, Jordan. The public threats undermine any serious diplomatic efforts. While indirect communication via intermediaries like Pakistan might be occurring, the president's public pronouncements make it incredibly difficult for Iran to appear to negotiate under duress. It hardens their stance. And frankly, it risks alienating potential international partners who might otherwise push for de-escalation. The international community is watching with growing concern, especially given the impact on global energy markets. This administration's foreign policy seems to be one of constant brinkmanship.
Indeed. Maya, thank you for that vital context. Let's shift our focus domestically, where we're seeing other concerning actions and developments. Jordan, one story that caught my eye, which seems almost surreal, is the Army reviewing a helicopter flight near Kid Rock's property, where he was saluting. It raises questions about potential misuse of military resources, especially with Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. What are your thoughts on this?
Nadia, it's baffling, to say the least. At a time when we're facing such serious challenges, both abroad and at home, the idea of military assets being potentially used for what appears to be a publicity stunt or a show of political allegiance is deeply troubling. It speaks to a blurring of lines between military operations and political messaging that should concern all of us. And it's not the only instance of questionable judgment we're seeing from this administration. We also have the president unveiling renderings for his proposed presidential library in Miami, a towering glass skyscraper with his name in gold. It's quite a vision, isn't it?
A vision, indeed. It perfectly encapsulates the brand, doesn't it? But moving from the performative to the substantive, the Trump administration is also pushing for a significant expansion of nuclear power, aiming to quadruple U.S. capacity by 2050, even as it rolls back support for other clean energy sources. It's a contradictory approach to energy policy. And speaking of contradictions, California Governor Gavin Newsom has signed an executive order imposing new AI regulations, directly defying President Trump's push for deregulation. This sets up a fascinating state-federal conflict. Jordan, how do you see this playing out?
It's a classic example of states stepping in when the federal government either won't or takes a different approach. California often leads on these complex regulatory issues, and AI is no exception. It's a critical area with immense societal implications, and the lack of a coherent federal strategy leaves a vacuum. While the nuclear expansion might seem like a forward-looking energy policy on its face, the simultaneous rollback of other clean energy initiatives feels like a step backward for a holistic approach to climate and energy security. It's a very narrow focus.
It truly is. Now let's turn to some of the civil rights and democratic process issues that have emerged. We have several stories here that speak to the heart of what Democracy Roundtable stands for. Priya, you cover civil rights and social justice. We've seen no kings, protests across the U.S. and worldwide, reportedly the largest in U.S. history, reflecting concerns over immigration, military actions, and civil rights. And then there's the class action lawsuit filed by January 6th rioters, alleging excessive force by police, seeking millions in damages. How do you reconcile these two narratives of protest and grievance?
Thank you, Nadia. It's a stark contrast, isn't it? On one hand, you have millions of people exercising their fundamental right to protest, peacefully demonstrating against policies they see as undermining democracy and human rights. The No Kings protests are a powerful expression of collective concern over the direction the country is headed, particularly regarding civil liberties and the administration's aggressive foreign policy. Then, on the other hand, you have a lawsuit from individuals who attacked the Capitol, attempting to overturn a democratic election, now claiming they were the victims of excessive force. It really highlights the fractured perception of justice and accountability in our society. It's a challenge to the very idea of consequences for actions that aim to subvert our democratic process.
I think there's more to it, Priya. This lawsuit, coming over 5 years after the event, feels like another attempt to rewrite history, to reframe the narrative of what happened on January 6th. It's a dangerous precedent if it gains any traction, as it could further embolden those who seek to use violence or intimidation to achieve political ends. It's a direct assault on the rule of law and the officers who defended the Capitol.
Absolutely, Jordan. And to add another layer to this, Priya, we also have the Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco suspending his investigation into alleged voter fraud in the Proposition 50 election, citing politically motivated lawsuits after seizing 650,000 ballots. This echoes a larger pattern of questioning electoral integrity without substantial evidence. What does this mean for public trust in our elections?
It's incredibly damaging, Nadia. When law enforcement officials launch politically charged investigations into elections, especially when they seize ballots and then halt the inquiry citing politically motivated lawsuits, it creates a cloud of suspicion and erodes confidence. This wasn't about uncovering legitimate fraud. It was about fueling a narrative of doubt. It's another example of how certain actors are actively working to destabilize trust in our democratic processes, making it harder for citizens to believe their vote counts or that elections are fair. It's a dangerous game, especially after the events of 2020 and 2025.
A very dangerous game indeed. Thank you, Priya. Now, let's bring in Elena to discuss another critical area, immigration. Elena, Congressman Joaquin Castro is calling for the release of a sick 2-year-old boy and his mother from an ICE detention center in Texas, citing concerns about the child's health and inadequate medical care. This is a recurring issue we hear about. What's the latest on this heartbreaking situation?
Thanks, Nadia. It's a deeply distressing situation that, unfortunately, is not isolated. Congressman Castro's intervention highlights the ongoing and systemic issues within immigration detention facilities, particularly concerning vulnerable populations like children and families. The allegations of a sick child not receiving proper medical attention at the Dilley facility, which has faced similar accusations in the past, are incredibly concerning. These centers are not equipped to provide adequate care, and detaining children, especially those who are ill, is not only inhumane but often medically negligent. It underscores the urgent need for a complete overhaul of our immigration detention policies and practices to prioritize the well-being and rights of individuals, rather than treating them as security risks.
It's hard to hear stories like that without feeling a sense of outrage. The image of a sick 2-year-old in detention just feels so antithetical to our values. Elena, are there any signs that this administration is reconsidering its approach to family detention, or is this just business as usual?
Sadly, Jordan, despite the consistent outcry from advocates and lawmakers, we haven't seen any significant shift in policy from the current administration. In fact, many policies have only intensified detention and enforcement. The focus remains on deterrence through harsh measures, rather than addressing the humanitarian aspects or the root causes of migration. So unfortunately, it largely remains business as usual, with these individual cases bringing much needed, but often temporary, attention to a deeply entrenched problem.
That's a sobering assessment, Elena, and it reminds us of the constant vigilance required in these areas. Thank you to all our correspondents today. Before we wrap up, Jordan, any final thoughts on the sheer breadth of issues we've covered? From global conflict to local corruption, like the New York Council member and governor's aide under federal bribery investigation for migrant shelter funds, and even, believe it or not, the Democracy Manifest, speech being preserved in Australia's National Film and Sound Archive.
It's a lot to process, Nadia. What strikes me is the interconnectedness of it all. The international instability, the domestic challenges to democratic norms, the issues of civil rights and human dignity. They all speak to a common thread of questioning accountability and the very definition of democracy. Even the more lighthearted Democracy Manifest story from Australia, while a historical curiosity, ironically reminds us how deeply ingrained the concept of democracy and its perceived threats are in the public consciousness. We're living in a moment where fundamental principles are under constant pressure, and vigilance is not just a virtue, but a necessity.
Vigilance, indeed. And that's why we'll continue these conversations every week here on Democracy Roundtable. My thanks to Jordan, Maya, Elena, and Priya for their invaluable insights today. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week to continue dissecting the issues that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.